You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Monday evening, folks. Thanks for coming over to my show. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and listen to all the goodness in the schedule that is Odyssey Radio. And also, you can catch this show live right now, along with the live chat room and the other Intrepheads over on my simulcast on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. How are you all doing this morning? How was your weekend? How was your weekend in isolation? Are you one of the... you could call it lucky, you could call it unlucky to be in self-imposed isolation, a little free vacation. But of course, you can't do anything. You're not supposed to go out and have any contact. So, other than the bare essentials, so they say. But did you have a good weekend? Are you able to enjoy this time? Or is it a nail-biting, worrisome time, wondering where money's going to come from, wondering how the job is going to go, etc.? Well, I hope you are coasting through this okay, and you can make the best of it. Right now, it's a great time if you got kids to reconnect with kids. And I'm saying that to parents as small. Reconnect, I see my kids every day. Well, reconnecting is giving them more of your time because you got more of it to give. And kind of doing stuff that you wish you could do all the time. Last night, Rainey, my wife, she was out dancing to music videos in the living room with my two little girls, Ellery and Rowan Claire. And they were all laughing and having a great time and screaming and jumping up and down, and the house was banging with music. And Flynn, my 10-year-old boy, and I were here in the studio on our computers talking guy stuff and Pokemon and things like that, which my son likes. So he wants me to learn how to play Pokemon with him now. And so we got time to do that. So we're going to do it. Rainey she ran out to Walmart and picked up, and Target, I think, when she was in the city the other day. She had a medical appointment. She went out there and she picked up some kind of creative toys for the kids. Things that she can sit down, I can sit down. We're working on Flynn for his Cub Scouts, which he's now at the top level. He's in Webelos, which is 10-year-old boys. That's the one step before next year he'll be in Boy Scouts. And so he's got the Nova Award that he's looking for. And that's all science projects and things like that. And there's 100 things on a list he has to accomplish this year. And so she's gotten a bunch of stuff for him for that. I got him a telescope. I found a telescope at the Goodwill, all in the packaging and everything, for $12. Yeah, it's a little rickety. I got to tighten up a couple of things because it's used. But look at the stars and stuff like that. And I got a telescope, a couple of them stashed around here somewhere, bigger ones, older ones. And so things like that, spending time with your kids. Are you having the ability to do some of that? With your partner, with your wife or your husband or your significant other. You have some time to do that now. And is it overshadowed by the fact that there is maybe forced layoff right now because everything's closed down? Are you dealing with the politics of it all well enough? It seems like there's still political games being played with it all, as the recent news is the Democrats shut down the Republicans' funding bill for people who are in crisis financially over the coronavirus. And so, depending on what persuasion you are politically, you've got an argument for that, for or against. I say get the fighting out of it. Doesn't matter what party it is. If somebody profited from this and is in the Senate or the House, can them. I don't care what party they're in, Republican or Democrat. If somebody is blocking assistance for people, if somebody is tacking bills on or blocking the bill because people can't get their school bills paid, that's the most recent one that Pelosi and Schumer have resisted. Let's block the aid bill for people who are suffering right now because their loss of work and loss of money, small businesses that are suffering. Let's block that bill because the Republicans won't add the paying off school loans in there. Not just setting them aside for a while till people are back on their feet, but paying them off. So the Democrat, so you look at all this stuff and you go, that's politics. Politics is being played. So does that tell you something about how seriously our legislators in Congress take this whole thing? Pisses me off, and I think they should all be canned if they're going to play games with our lives. So there you go. Hopefully, I don't know how I lapsed into politics there. I hope you're faring this well and also wading through the mire of all the different things that you see on the social media, and every post, almost every post as I'm scrolling through social media has to do with coronavirus. And it's overwhelming, and it's become utterly, what's the word I'm looking for? Not overwhelming, because I'm not like overwhelmed. Oh my God. No, I'm overwhelmed with, oh my God. And more and more and more of the same. I have more people send me private messages, emails with videos and links. And it's like, folks, I don't need any of that stuff. I know the stuff that's out there. No offense to anybody. So if you're being overwhelmed, if you're being flooded, glutted with this information, just turn it off and ignore it for a while. And it's all going to go away eventually. And so take your precautions. If you're at home, make the best of it. If you're financially hurting, look at what they're doing. Find out who's out there to help. And hopefully you're making it through all this okay. So, I'm going to distract you with something totally different. It's not a happy topic, but it's a topic that's important because a lot of us experience this. And I'm going to get back into what we started talking about last week, and that's about boundaries, about codependency. On top of all the stuff I talk about spirituality, theology, history, all of that stuff, this is all that vital stuff that we all deal with. And the reason I have any knowledge of this stuff at all is because I've been through it. And I've been through it with people when I was in situations where I was not an official psychotherapist or marriage therapist or anything like that, but I worked not only in youth, but later when I was still in kind of lay ministry, I worked with men in troubled marriages, small groups at my church. Now that's years ago, but I heard just about every story you could want to hear. And there was one guy I know, I'll just share this with you. He was in my group, and he came to me and said, I don't love my wife anymore. And so we're separating. And I just have fallen out of love with her. And there are actually a couple of different stories on this, because there was one guy who said, okay, let's do this. I said, take out a piece. I slid a pencil and a yellow pad across the table to him, and I said, hey man, take this, do something for me. Write down 20 things you would do for your wife if you did love her. If you loved somebody enough to want to be with them, give me a list of 20 things. And he kind of chuckled and laughed and moaned and groaned through it, and we came up with a list. I helped him a little. Well, how about this? The obvious: flowers, chocolates, take her on a date, do this, do that, rubber feet, anything. So this list became 20, and we made it there, and I said, okay, now, and I slid it back across the table to him, and I said, okay, take that list, and over the next 30 days, do one of those every day. And he kind of rolled his eyes, and I said, no, I'm serious. Do it. Excuse me. I said, if you have dry throat today, I said, if you don't think you love your wife and you think your marriage is worth saving, why don't you go do these things that actively show that you love your wife? Sip a nice warm coffee to wet the whistle. And so he kind of, not really reluctantly, but kind of tongue-in-cheek, he kind of took off. And a couple of months later, I saw he and his wife together, and I said, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And I pulled him aside. We were talking, and he said, "You know that list?" He says, "I went home and I started doing it." He says, "You know what? I love my wife." And so, guys, if you're out there and you feel, even women, if you're out there and you feel, I don't love my spouse anymore, why don't you make a little list of things you would do if you did love them? Implement them. Take action. Put action to your life instead of just words. And by your deeds, just actively do. And it's going to revolutionize your situation. I guarantee it. It did for this guy. And I've heard this being done in other places as well. That wasn't an original idea with me to make the list. I had heard that somewhere, 25 years ago. So there is that. And then there was also another guy told me the same thing. I'm out of love with my wife, and we went through some of the steps, and we talked and talked. Then I find out he's involved with the secretary, literally the secretary at his office. And I said, "You know what, buddy?" I said, as long as you are going to replace your wife with somebody else, of course you don't love your wife anymore, because you've put your affections somewhere else. Figure out where you need to be. And don't live in this limbo in the middle. Either leave your commitment and go somewhere else, or whatever you're going to do, take the action and do it. Don't just stand there in the middle and hurt everybody in the process. And he had kids in the marriage too. And so, of course, I told him I thought that was a stupid thing for him to do. "That's stupid, Frank," I said. You gotta not do that, first of all. But if you're going to do it and get it done with. Move on. Make life go on. And sort out the pieces with your family. So, anyway, all that to say, we all have situations. That's the reason I talked about that. We all have situations. We all have things that we've done or the other person has done, or things that we know of, or we've been in entanglements in the past, even before marriage, sometimes after marriage. Those things happen. We are all creatures of passion. And so, guard your heart, guard your passions. Guard the things you're doing. It doesn't mean we don't think about it and we aren't drawn to other people and there aren't things like that. And this is not a topic I plan to talk about. It's coming off my head because I rabbit trailed. But you know what? It doesn't mean that we don't care about other people. It doesn't mean we couldn't fall in love with somebody else other than the person we've committed to. It just means that we need to guard our hearts. And guard where our affections go. And do everything possible to make the situation work. Boy, it sounds like such a negative when you talk about, I got to make my marriage work. Well, if you're invested in anything, if you're at a good job, you got to make your job work so it works for you and it's beneficial to you and you're beneficial to the company. You've got to make it work. It's the same thing with anything we put our attentions to, our passions to, our drive to, the things we invest ourselves in. Let me ask you, guys, are you invested in your wife? Wives, are you invested in your husbands? And of course, husband and wife just doesn't define couples anymore, does it? There's a million different kinds of situations out there. So just look at your situation. And there is that old biblical verse that does say, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Do you treasure your partner? Do you treasure your family? I used to talk to guys that were thinking of leaving their marriages. One of them was the same guy I mentioned who didn't love his wife anymore because, there's the woman at the office. So many guys, and I talked to my small groups about this when I was dealing with men, is that they compartmentalize so easily that they move their affections other places. And I said to more than one guy, and in the group when we talk about this stuff, how do you move forward in your marriage, in your life, and keep it vital, and keep it a thing that is where your treasure is? Are your children your treasure? Is your wife your treasure? Because I got to tell you something, folks. It's my opinion that there is not a single problem that a marriage can face, especially a marriage with children involved in it, not a single problem that can take place that we do not have the ability to overcome and to make it work because we invest ourselves in it. We've got a society over the last few decades that's grown too easy to walk away from something. And, there are things that are valid reasons to walk away from something. Abuse is one of them. Alcoholism, adultery, to coin an old word that we don't hear that much about anymore. Those are valid reasons. When those things happen, walk away. There are better things to do. But you know what? I've known a lot of couples who've worked through those problems together because they love each other and they've chosen where they're going to invest their heart. That's where their treasure is. Refocus. Re-examine. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get preachy to you guys out there at all. Pardon me for doing that. These are my opinions. This is the way I see things. And if you like this show, you like listening, you don't have to agree with everything I say, but it's going to come with my opinions about things. So there you go. Am I perfect in that area? No. I've committed adultery in my past. I've committed adultery of the mind in my past. Emotional affairs. And things like that. I've been there. I've been around the block. I'm almost 60 years old. Had a lot of living. And so, you know what? It's admitting that you've done that to yourself and saying, where do I want to be? You got to rise above the mire of daily life and figure out what you want and what you need. And if you don't know what you want and what you need, and you're involved in a relationship, that's a rough place to be in. Figure it out. It's like everything else. It's like Rocky and I say, when we talk about politics and anything else, yeah, we talk about a lot of buttholes and nipples and things like that. We have a lot of fun with that. But when you cut through the fun and frivolity of what we do, even Rocky and Rocky will tell you, common sense, folks, use your common sense. Figure things out. Make it work. All right. That's all a prelude to getting into... Now, as I was talking about that, remember I said there are valid reasons to walk from a relationship? Even an established relationship? Abuse is one of them. And abuse comes in many forms these days. It doesn't necessarily mean, do those dishes or I'm going to give you a black eye, Betty. It doesn't always mean that. It could be what we've termed now... It's an old term that's been brought back into vogue, gaslighting. It involves emotional abuse. It involves spiritual abuse. There are many different forms of abuse out there. And so one of them is this whole codependency issue that we started talking about last Friday. And for a couple of days before that, we kind of hit on this. And so I want to get back into what we were talking about with the whole codependency issue. And what is a codependent? A codependent, I wonder if I have actually a textbook. Let's do this. While I'm sitting here at my computer, let's find out what codependency, if I spelled that right, dependency. Okay, let's see what codependency is, how that's defined. Codependency, by definition, is a behavioral condition in a relationship where one person enables another person's addiction, or poor mental health, or immaturity, or irresponsibility, or narcissism, or controlling, or underachieving. Among the core characteristics of codependency is an excessive reliance on other people for approval and a sense of identity. Codependents, you're going to find them always wanting to need somebody to bolster them. The codependent is not the person committing the acts of addiction or mental health problems or immaturity or responsibility, except in the sense that they allow the other person to do that. They make excuses for them, and then they go cry to all their friends about how poor they are, how abused they are, but they don't do anything to change it. Many times codependency comes from perhaps abuses in their youth, watching their parents in a codependent relationship, things like that. Now, my mom is somebody who grew up as she was in codependency her life, trying to get over issues. Her mother, my grandmother, maternal grandmother, who may she rest in peace. She passed away some almost 30 years ago, I think. And now, I'm not even thinking of the date, but she was a drug addict. Think of being a drug addict in the 50s. We think of drug addicts now. We think of people who are messed up on meth and on the street and scratching their faces all the time, looking for the next fix. She was think of Leave It to Beaver's mom, Mrs. Beaver, Cleaver, I guess the name was, Cleavers. The dress, the pearl necklace, the apron. My grandfather was a union organizer in his company. He's white shirt and tie. He was a computer salesman. And the last thing he did when computers were not on the desktop, when they were the size of a room. And but my mom's mother, maternal grandmother, was a drug addict, and she would look for a fix anywhere she could, from usually prescription drugs and things like that. And so she wasn't like on street meth or anything like that. But my mom said, not that we're revealing true secrets, never knew my grandmother very well, very distant. My grandfather divorced her when I was probably 2 years old. And so she moved back out of state. We didn't see much of her. And my mom didn't want to connect with her that much because my mom remembers stories, recounting stories. Sorry, Mom, if you're out there listening, I'm revealing a private story. I think my mom would talk about this if she were here with me. But she would see her own mom, my grandmother, sitting in her bedroom with the door closed, and my mom would peek in, and she was whacking her thigh with a hammer so she could create bruises to say that she hurt herself, and so she could get meds for pain because she was addicted to them. Now that's a sad story all by itself, but my mom grew up with that. So my mom, was went to these groups for codependency when she was an adult and things like that. And so codependency is sometimes the person trapped in the situation, and they don't want to leave the situation when they should. My grandfather left that situation. He divorced my grandmother, and he was single my whole life, as far as I knew. He had lots of girlfriends. He was a kind of a hipster, my grandfather. This is the guy who, in the late 70s, when I was in high school, graduating from high school, went and bought a little island down in the Honduras, and went and became a dive master, a scuba diving master for a little resort down there. And by resort, don't think big and built up. It was a little on-the-beach resort, and they dove on the reefs down there, and he bought land, and that's where he lived until he died. And, about 25 years ago. So all that to say, he got himself out of that situation because he was not a codependent. He was not going to be codependent with his wife. But what it did to my mom was it created codependency in her, having to cover up for her mom, So if you're trapped in that situation, this is who I'm talking to. And so hopefully this was helpful, because we haven't even hit the topic barely until just right now, and we're at the end of this segment. So folks, sit tight. We're going to be right back. We're going to dig into this. Signs of codependency, why codependents stay in relationships, how to escape it, and things like that. Let's see if we can get to it all today. Sit tight. We'll be back 2 minutes. right, folks, we're back. Thanks for being here. This is Scotty Roberts. This is the second segment of the show tonight. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Go over and see all the goodness in the schedule and the lineup over there at Odyssey Radio. You can be listening to cool stuff all day long. And so go check them out at ODYSY1.com. You can also hear this broadcast right now. If you're listening and you're near a computer, you can watch the simulcast in video over on my YouTube channel, and that is youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. You can join the live chat room over there and all the other Intrepheads and throw your 2 cents worth in on this. It's a heavy topic. So you can throw your 2 cents in, or you can just simply watch the chat. The chat's live as it's going. So come on over, enjoy yourself. That's Mr. Scotty Roberts over at YouTube. Now we're talking about, I think, a serious topic. Even though it's not lighthearted, it's not something that distracts you in a fun way from maybe being isolated in your home, maybe having your income stunted a bit by all the stuff that's going on. We talked about that in the first half. Let's move on from that and say this is an important topic because I think it's something that many of us have either dealt with or many of us are going through, or maybe you're going through it. As I mentioned last week when we talked about this, there were some people in the chat room that said, mostly women, that said, I'm trapped in a situation. I'm in a codependency situation. I'm in a problem with the, and I don't leave. I just keep going back. Well, this is a thing that encourages you not necessarily to leave, but figuring it out, figuring out where you want to be, acting in common sense, doing the things you need to do to either help fix that problem, or promote fixing that problem, or promote the other person fixing their problem that they bring to the table, but in common sense figuring out where you need to be. Now, we kind of left off last Friday talking about, I'm going to kind of end this little section and move into the next, but the common reasons that boundaries are a challenge for codependence, and we defined codependency in the middle of the last segment. Common reasons for reasons that boundaries are really challenging and really hard for codependent people in those kinds of relationships. 1, fear of confrontation. Simply the act of standing up to the partner might be overwhelming for the codependent, particularly if these types of issues have resulted in the partner leaving them, or threatening to leave them, or becoming emotionally or physically abusive or controlling. Things like that in the past. Those are the abusive things I talked about. Abuse can take a whole scores of different definitions and different outcomes. So fear of confrontation is why codependents allow the behavior to go on and don't do anything about their own situation there. Number 2 is lack of understanding of needs. If you never know boundaries in relationships, including in your relationship with your parents, it's difficult to know what you need. So understanding what your needs are in a relationship like that keeps people from doing anything about their codependent status. Number 3, the belief that others are more important. More important. Not equally important, not of importance, but more important than your situation. And so the deeply ingrained belief that the other person is more important and needs to come first is an overwhelming factor in the challenge of building boundaries and maintaining them. Fear of loss of approval is another one. That's number 4. When the partner has always had his way or her way in the relationship, and particularly with a narcissist, setting boundaries is going to lead to a lack of approval. And for the codependent, this is really the biggest fear that they have. And working with a therapist or somebody that can help talk you through these things is instrumental, I believe, in developing effective coping strategies. And not just merely giving in to the other person and going back to the old lack of boundaries relationship. Isn't that what most codependents do? They keep going back despite the continued abuse of one form or another. Number 5 is taking the blame route. Some codependents become nagging or aggressive when they try to set boundaries. So instead of setting the boundary and following through, they constantly repeat information, criticize, or blame the other person for the change in the relationship rules. And this may lead to the codependent threatening to leave or to do something they will not do, which reinforces the lack of boundaries when the partner challenges this or there's a new need or value that's brought in. Again, pardon me for lack of cough button. I've dry throat today. And it's exacerbated by talking. And so I think I use my voice pretty well. The tools that you use when you either act or you speak in public or you sing, I use my voice pretty well, but I'm dry-throated today, so pardon me for that. The sick cough is gone, though. Remember I had that for weeks? That's all gone. So that's a good thing. So lack of support is I don't know if I'm on 6 or 7. Lack of support. It's common for a person who's in a codependent relationship to be emotionally and socially isolated. This is why I think you see these people constantly on social media, or when you talk to them, they're the person that's always got this thing, and they've always got to dump that on you and share that with you, or repeating these things, because they are not escaping it. They're not getting out of it. They're not using common sense. They're not figuring it out. They're staying there. And it continues to perpetuate. Your time is spent trying to make the other partner happy, and so the friends and family are often ignored or brushed off. And this isolation, this lack of support, benefit the abuser, the narcissist, the addict, the emotionally abusive partner, as he or she is aware that they are your only connection, that you're isolated. So now, low self-esteem and self-worth. If you're a codependent, you have a low sense of self-worth. Your self-esteem, which is a term that, got kind of overused for a couple of decades there, and we start to slip away from that and find other ways to define it. But your self-esteem, your self-worth, it's gone. It's out the window. And this makes it difficult to see yourself as worthy of the respect that's due to you. Not respect you demand, respect that's common, that's due to you, which makes it a challenge to be able to set any kind of boundaries and then follow through on consequences if they're not followed. Now, that's the big thing. You can set all the boundaries you want, but if you don't follow through, what good is a boundary? So the good news is that these types of beliefs, these fears, these issues can be changed. It's important to learn new ways of setting boundaries that are empowering, that promote self-care, that help you feel good about yourself and those around you. And so getting past these boundary barriers are what's essential for a person who's a codependent. Getting past boundary setting fears and barriers isn't easy. It takes time. It takes support. It takes a willingness to learn to believe in the value of yourself. Value who you are. I've always said about my kids will say, or somebody will say to me, well, what's so-and-so going to think? Or how's that going to look, Dad? Or it's like, I don't care. Because I value myself. And that's on any given thing, by the way. Not an issue of codependency when I'm talking to my kids. I don't care what other people think. If there are 5 people out there on social media that want to point a finger at me or call me this or call me that or hate me or whatever, if there's 10 of them, so what? That's 10 people. I don't care. I know hundreds of people. So it's moving beyond that. It's getting that. It's like when I talk about not being offended. You know why you can't offend me? Because I choose to not be offended. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't things that do offend me, that do hurt me, and I have to dig deep sometimes on that. But overall, most of it, 95% of it's superficial. It's like, I don't care. If you want to say that about me, you're welcome to your opinion. You're not going to make me go cry and tuck my tail and run and shrivel up in a corner. And you're certainly, if you're going to abuse me, you're gonna see an awful lot of my backside walking out. So let me put one caveat in there. I do not promote walking out of your relationship, especially when you have kids, over issues like these just because you have some issues. Work through the goddamn issues, folks. Get it out in the open. Work on it. Be honest with each other. Be honest with yourself. Determine what you need to be. Okay, that's in that boundaries category. So it's possible to learn to set and articulate limits in any relationship. And then also to set consequences that you're going to use to hold yourself accountable to the boundaries that you're setting up. You have to be accountable to yourself. And so the keys to setting boundaries are these. 1, loving yourself. It sounds so new agey, so psychobabbly, and I hate that. I hate the gobbledygook of psychobabble. But this is truth. Loving yourself, caring for yourself. The first step is to begin the journey of learning to love who you are and elevate yourself a bit and develop a sense of self-worth and self-value. It's a learning process, guys, and it involves unlearning all those negative messages and being open to looking to at yourself from a completely new point of view. And if you can hear the kids screaming out there, that's what they do. Nobody's really hurt. There's no real problem there. Kids arguing. So the second one, understanding what you value. Boundaries are fairly general. They're not universal for all people. What works for me might not work for you and vice versa. So what one person might be willing to accept in a relationship, another may not. However, what is accepted has to be healthy. It has to be healthy. Has to be positive. Has to be beneficial. Or it's not an effective boundary within the relationship. Take a look at what you value and what you need as the starting point for setting your boundaries that are relevant and meaningful and honest and healthy. Okay, I think I'm 3. Take a look at what you want to do. Oftentimes and priorities are a problem for codependents. They're afraid of losing the friendship or status. So they say yes to everything, even when they don't have the time or the energy to do the things that they've committed to complete. By learning to take the time to consider what you want to do, prioritizing your time, it's easier to find ways to say no. No is an okay answer, guys. Or I'm busy at that time without feeling overwhelmed and with guilt and fear or hating yourself for not standing up for your needs. Stand up for your needs. Say, yeah, this is what I need. I'm not talking about to the exclusion of everybody else. Common sense. Healthy. Saying no. That's involved. Next one is talk about boundaries. Talking to, counselors, coaches, friends, whoever, and family members can be very insightful in understanding how everyone else sets their boundaries. So understanding how boundaries are used in all types of relationships and not just in an intimate partnership can be both educational, it can be informative, and it can be something that helps you set common sense goals. Practice communicating messaging. Learning how to articulate and communicate your beliefs, your needs, your wants, your values is essential. This might seem like learning a new language, particularly if you're a person who has never spoken about their needs before. Practicing how to communicate is a core skill to master in your relationships. Communicate. Open your mouths. We used to say of some people, we knew. As I grew up, my mom would say she wouldn't. How did she say this? She said she wouldn't say shit if her mouth was full of it. And so, things like that. phrases like that. Are you that kind of a person? Do you just not speak up for yourself? You have to practice to communicate what you're feeling about stuff and where you're at. And sometimes you got to tell that person that you might be afraid of for one reason or another. It's also essential to reach out for help from people. Learning to set boundaries, upholding yourself to those boundaries without giving in or going back to odd, unhealthy behaviors is complicated. It's hard. There's going to be times when it seems easier to just give in, throw in the towel. But every time you give in, you send yourself and the other person a message. That message is that you are not of value in the relationship, which is currently not the case, certainly not the case. So every time you throw in the towel, every time you walk back in and do not set those boundaries and allow the behavior to continue, putting you in that position, you are the codependent and you are the one that's making it worse on yourself. And that message you're sending is one that you're of no value in the relationship. So over time, setting and maintaining boundaries when you're that codependent person in a relationship becomes more comfortable. There might be times you start to think negatively. You simply want to avoid the confrontation or you're emotionally tired. That happens. Been there. But even in these situations, you can be strong, you can be assertive, and you can practice caring for yourself. You know, folks, when I talk about my mantra for life, which I've taken, yeah, it's cliche to say that, but I've quoted the Mark Twain many times. You've heard me say this, where he says this. He says, 20 years from now, you will regret more the things you didn't do than the things you did do. So cast away from the safe harbor. Set your sails to the trade winds, explore, dream, discover. That's more than just talking about adventure. That's talking about other facets of your life. You know, 20 years from now, you don't want to get 20 years down the road and say, I should have done something back then. I should have set boundaries back then. I should have worked on this back then. I should have tried to figure out my self-worth back then. 20 years from now, you'll regret more not doing it than the things that you did do. So cast away. Now is the time. Life is to be lived. Life is about an adventure. Make it an adventure, not a prison sentence. Find the ways you need to find to make it work, to figure it out. And it's as easy as doing it. Because many times people I've talked to who've been in these codependency situations, you know what? They already know all the answers. Sometimes when I've done tarot readings for people, when I was doing them every week at my house, when I have a big gathering, I have the same one or two people that would come back every week and want a new reading. And the readings, strangely enough, were always the same. Not the same cards all the time, but the same answers. And there was one point where I started, at least with one person I remember, where I started telling him, no, I'm not going to do a reading for you today. You know why? Because you already know what your needs are. You already know what to do. Now that's in a spiritual sense. When you know things in your head about your situation and you don't act on them, you're putting yourself in that situation and you are basically signaling, messaging to everybody, I'm worthless. I'm not worth this. So change it. It's that easy. It's difficult to do, but it's easy to take the step. 20 years from now, you'll regret more the things you didn't do than the things you did do. So the big question now to ask is, why do codependents stay in damaging relationships? Each relationship seems like the perfect love. And why do they stay there? Most people have at least one person in their life who seems to be in the same horrible, dead-end relationship over and over and over again. But the partner seems to change. boom, boom, boom. Oh, it's all different people, but they're still in. Every time you see them, there's always something wrong with their relationship. And upon closer look, it's as if the individual is attracted only to one personality type, and one that's very negative, destructive, uncaring. And each relationship seems like the perfect love, the perfect situation. Oh, this is the guy. Oh, this is the girl. And it typically develops quickly after the breaking up of current bad relationships, and it escalates from a friendship or a casual meeting to a full-blown love affair in record time. And while this is happening, Mr. or Mrs. Right becomes the object of the obsession for the codependent. And at the same time, the narcissist is also showing a different side of his or her personality, going out of their way to be charming, attentive, to do everything the codependent person wants or needs and hears to hear and experience. So the codependent, ever hoping for the perfect relationship, ignores all those warning signs, all those red flags that pop up. I've been there, folks. Have you been there? The red flags, we ignore them. And the obvious repetition of a pattern she or he has seen many times before becomes something they are drawn and sucked into like a black hole. And codependents ignore the advice of friends and family, focusing instead on building the perfect relationship this time. Oh, this person's so much better. Oh, it's so different. Oh, you should see this about, oh, if only you. So once the partnership is formalized, which may be through marriage or living together, the narcissist takes the mask off. And often it starts to slip well before this point, but the codependent is also not willing to look for the problems. So the issues, the lies, the manipulations, the need to control goes unchecked. I don't know how many times I've had people come to me, Scotty, and this person's so wonderful. I go, look, be careful. You're opening yourself up to the same thing you were in. Take time, evaluate. You can give all the advice you want, but they just forge ahead. And you're like, oh my God, you are running right back into the lion's den. When a codependent sees life as a choice between living in a kind of fantasy, matrimonial romance novel, or the sheer hell of being single, they become obsessed with the idea of being in a romantic relationship, no matter what the cost. And when that happens, relationships just pile up. Start putting notches on the belt sometimes. You can count them that way. And not that they're seeking the notch on the belt. They're seeking the permanent, and they end up with a long list of things, of people, relationships. And they become increasingly tangled and messy. And so codependents become serial disasters because they jump in feet first again and again and again without first doing the work of unearthing the trauma and the issues that they bring to the table, the garbage bags that they're dragging along behind them, and that keeps them in this cycle of addiction. So, staying in a devastating, destructive marriage or relationship is worth the pain to them as long as they don't need to be on their own. Oh, I can't be single. You know people like that? And additionally, it's not likely that a codependent without support and assistance leaves a relationship, even if there is emotional, verbal, and physical violence. It takes them a hell of a lot of time and work to figure out, I got to step out of this if there's nobody helping them. And sometimes they don't even want to listen to you. If you go, hey, that guy you're getting involved, hey, that woman you're getting involved with, dude, bad news, don't go there. And here's why. And they're like, I got this. I need this, is what they're saying. They're messaging that they can't live without it. You know what, folks? We can all live without someone else. when we give in to living with someone else is in a healthy way, is when we realize that there's love there, that there's a connection there, that you're both feeling that for each other. And there's a lot more to it than that. Just trying to get through that and make that point. So it's equally important to note that this cycle doesn't just stop suddenly. Even if a codependent were to find a healthy partner, her or his codependent behaviors, relationship, personal insecurities, their ability to be autonomous within relationships drives off the healthy partner. And I didn't even get to the part about how to get out. Work with a therapist. Become a comfortable single, learning to be comfortable individual. Start focusing on you. All these things. We'll hit that again tomorrow. So folks, we got to go. We're at the end of the time. Thanks for being here. Think about this stuff, especially if you're in this situation. We'll talk to you tomorrow.